All right, we are live. It is Thursday morning. It is time for the burning platform. We're going to get into all the stories this week that have caught everybody's attention, all the things that are going on in the news. I don't know if you heard that promo about Dr. Mark's show, vaginal orgasms, Phumi. There's some interesting stuff going on there, huh?
40%, huh?
40% of women cannot achieve a vaginal orgasm. Is that what she said?
That's what she said. It's quite a lot of information for 7 o'clock in the morning.
Do you think that there is a correlation, not necessarily causation, between 40% youth unemployment and 40% non-vaginal orgasms? These are the big questions. These are the big questions.
This information is just too much. I think there might be a correlation with another piece of information I read that something like 60% of all men ejaculate within 2 minutes. That may be the reason. 2 minutes may not be enough time for people to.
It may not be enough.
Sorry, guys. Wow. Sorry, guys. There's a serious conversation to be had here.
There is. But it's not going to happen with Phumi and I, I'm afraid. Not in the burning platform either. So we got a lot to talk about this morning in the news. Phumi and I have kind of discussed some of the issues around student protests and tertiary education, but we've got so much more to get into. Ivo wants to talk a little bit about the National Council of Provinces, which we never really pay any attention to, but they are our second chamber of parliament. I mean, they're an important part of the South African political landscape. There are people who have been sitting in the National Council of Provinces that we're paying for. We take Parliament very seriously, but we only think about the National Assembly. We don't think about the National Council of Provinces. And they are our upper house, supposedly, so we've got to talk about them a little bit today. We never do. And also the move against objectivity in journalism, according to Ivo. Ivo always talks about all kinds of interesting things. One of the things that's a big bugbear for him is environmental stuff. So we may have a chance to get into that too. But Ivo, it's always good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I am excellent. Cheerful as a spring morning.
I'm very, very happy to hear that. We need some cheer. Phumi and I were just bemoaning a whole bunch of shit in the first hour, so we need some cheer. And the other person who's joining...
I'm sorry, that's the end of the cheer that I have available.
All right, well, we'll have to try and make some, or we'll manufacture cheer. And here is Kanthan Pillay, who is also joining us this morning. Of course, Kanthan knows the burning platform like the back of his hand. He's pretty much been a part of it from the very get-go. And Kanthan always has quite a lot to say. And Kanthan, I know you have plenty to say about the president's new cabinet. Now,
look at him beaming with joy.
Did you get the cabinet that you've always dreamed of, Kanthan?
Guys, you might remember the last time around we said that a cabinet reshuffle is not going to make an iota of difference to what we're trying to do. So at that level, I don't really care. Look, frankly, we've still got the usual suspects in place. Bheki Cele is still there. Ibrahim Patel is still there. We've got Angie Motshekga is still there. Bloated Nzimande is still there. In other words, the most dysfunctional of the most dysfunctional have been retained in exactly the positions that they belong to.
And can I ask you all, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who's been in cabinet since the Mandela era, she has always been there. It's amazing to me how
actually, she was out of there when she was in the African Union. For a brief period, yes.
She seemed to come back in just like someone who had a seat. Yes. Anyway, the point is this also. I mean, this is the woman who ran against Cyril at Nasrec. She was one of the people who said that if he's re-elected and he wasn't ousted in just this last ANC's big conference, that she would get out and leave. Does she have so little else to do or so little self-respect, or is she being pressured by other people that she couldn't stand up and say, you know what, I don't want your crappy ministry of women, children, and people with disabilities, I'm out? Or does she have nothing else to go to?
I have no idea. I'm not privy to what goes on within the Dlamini-Zuma household these days. But I suspect that from Cyril's point of view, It's better to have her in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in.
What
Which
about
no,
What's that,
no,
Phumi?
Phumi, hang on. Repeat, say that again.
Lindiwe? She was also there from all those many years ago, has moved from position to position, and now she's out.
No, she must go to the CCMA.
I mean, the issue here is simple. All that he did was he basically handled his political opponents, right? By which I mean he kicked Lindiwe Sisulu out, and he, put NDZ in the union buildings where he can, in the little creche area over there where he can keep an eye on it. That's effectively what he did. The rest is all meaningless reshuffling. What baffled me, he's had a report. He said he was going to. They were working on a plan to reduce the size of the cabinet. Right? But first, they're going to increase it.
Yeah,
because that's seems reasonable to me.
Genius.
If I'm going to paint a car red, I'm going to start by painting it blue.
Yes.
He's actually had a plan. This is not about them working on a plan. He's had a plan on his desk for 4 years, saying this is how we reduce the cabinet to 22 ministers, I believe it was. Now we're back at 30, which gives South Africa one of the, if not the biggest cabinet in the world. This is absolutely his job for pals. It's all about his own loyalties and his own position within the party, consolidating his power base. None of this had anything to do with the people of South Africa, And right from the start, when he turned up late, and kept postponing it and so on. This is the same president that in 2018 said starting on time for us in the ANC is a big thing, because Nelson Mandela told us that if you don't start on time, then you're not respecting your audience. He said there would be an end to African time. He completely disrespects the people of South Africa. This was not about the people of South Africa. This was not about the needs of the country. This was purely about the needs of Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC. That's all he did.
I just want you to know on the issue of African time that true Africans know that you wait for the train because the train's not going to wait for you. They're always on time.
No, exactly. I mean, look. I think.
Wait. What are we talking about trains in South Africa now? Can Phumi?
What trains are we talking about? Africans. I'm talking about Africans and waiting because nobody waits for you. And this notion that African time is you're going to be late and because everybody's going to wait for you. I think this might be a notion of African politicians.
This may seem like a silly thing, and I'm glad that you reminded us that Nelson Mandela was the one who said you don't keep your audience waiting, but it's actually the rudest thing in the whole world. And you remember during those family meetings we had over COVID, he was also
did the same
late.
thing.
He was late for almost all of them. And I just think you can't get your shit together. Like a national address is a big deal that most presidents only get to do a few times in their lives, where they know people will be listening. They know people have to pay attention. And those first family meetings were so important because they were his opportunity not only to get everybody to rally behind him. Now we look back on them and it looks ridiculous because all those stupid things they made us do were completely pointless. Completely. And did everything except help people remain healthy or keep the country's economy going or keep people employed. In fact, it was...
made things worse.
Right. But at the time we were like, got to watch Cyril tonight. Got to make sure we know what's going on. He also had the opportunity in those family meetings because he was in completely honest one-to-one communication with every citizen to have fired half of the people who were a problem to him. He could have got rid of them. And look at what happens, by the way, when someone leaves the ANC's fold, when they leave the comfortable world of cabinet or of the NEC, they disappear. You can't find anyone to report on 3 words that Ace Magashule is saying right now. Can you?
Yeah, it's cold outside the ANC. That's always been a phrase, and it's absolutely true. Leaving the ANC, if you've got a comfortable position within it, leaving is a really, really brave or stupid thing to do. Probably both.
All right. Well, are you at least excited about our Minister of Electricity? I mean, Sputla Ramaphosa. Surely this is a good thing. Come on, Ivo. Don't be so negative.
No, I'm not excited about him at all. He used to be mayor of Pretoria, mayor of Tshwane.
Yeah.
And he's got a civil engineering degree. He apparently specialized in transport engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a few degrees on top of that in terms of, politics and business and so on, that take him up to a PhD. So he's got some qualifications, which I suppose is a good thing. But the closest that I could find that he was ever involved with electricity was a very dodgy smart meter contract in Tshwane, which people from that area might remember, where he bought, several 100,000 smart meters for somewhere north of R1 billion, failed to install most of them, so that the ones that did get installed eventually cost about 160,000 Rand each per unit. They didn't work very well. They didn't tell people their consumption, for example. They weren't really as smart as advertised. The whole deal got cancelled. Before the contract was signed, Pravin Gordhan actually warned him against doing that deal. So, although his only experience with electricity is a dodgy tender. I mean, this is Eskom's problem, dodgy tenders. How is he going to fix that? He's got no experience in fixing that. I have absolutely no faith in this whole idea that he's going to sort things out, and he's going to. Oh, and by the way, he's going to slap Gordhan and Gwede Mantashe into line.
Mm-hmm.
So they now agree. So they now agree on things, and Gwede Mantashe doesn't stop undermining everything, and he's going to now suddenly approve all the renewable energy stuff that he failed to approve because he's in the pockets of coal. Yeah, all of this is going to supposedly magically happen. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I really don't.
Well, I mean, you've written this pretty blistering attack on Cyril Ramaphosa. Are we so fed up with him that you could pretty much say anything you want right now? It's not even going to get a reaction out of people. Because I kind of get the feeling that Phumi was on this train a very, very long time ago, and that maybe, Ivo, your article will find a very warm audience, but that it's not news to anybody. This is your article called "Our Feckless President and His Bloated Self-Serving Cabinet," which people can go and read.
Isn't feckless such a lovely word?
It's a great word.
It's a great word. I stole it. Someone used it earlier in the day.
Saunderson May is fond of using it.
Yes, I love it. I love it too. So I have to steal it and use it.
If you want to read Ivo's article, it's on the Daily Friend, and you can find his bloated self-serving cabinet there as well. So Ivo,
another thing, just while we're on the topic of the new cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy called I forget his name. This is criminal of me, a writer. Anyway, he tweeted and he said, spare a thought for Judge Raymond Zondo, right, who had to swear in Zizi Kodwa, right, whom not too long ago he recommended for criminal prosecution. Right. This is a sign of intent on the part of Cyril Ramaphosa. Right. He says he's going to deal with corruption, but no, does he deal with corruption? No. Does he recommend Zizi Kodwa for criminal prosecution? No, he gives him a cozy cabinet job.
Yeah,
and it's not news to anyone. It shouldn't be, at least. And the people who were optimistic about Ramaphosa at the start, I never was. I was pessimistic about him right from the start. But I don't think anybody will be surprised anymore that this is all about him. This is all about not acting against corruption. And frankly, it's business as usual.
Can I throw a hint of optimism into this thing and tell you why I'm very excited about this cabinet reshuffle?
Okay, go. We've been waiting for this all week.
All right. Basically, the reason why, in my book, Cyril ended up delaying implementing a cabinet reshuffle is that he was trying his damnedest to not allow Paul Mashatile to become deputy president of the country. Now, if you consider the chain of events that's actually happened over the past several weeks, firstly, remember that Didi Mabuza basically forced Ramaphosa to acknowledge that he needed to be doing a cabinet reshuffle by using the occasion of a funeral to announce that he would be stepping down as deputy president of the country. At which point, Ramaphosa said, no, please don't step down until I do my cabinet reshuffle. And so Ramaphosa then sat back and then didn't do anything. And so Didi Mabuza forced his hand very effectively by resigning as an MP, because you can't be a deputy president of the country unless you happen to be an MP. So that effectively forced a situation where Cyril needed to do a cabinet reshuffle. And I'm reasonably sure that all of the delays that happened were not because of rudeness, but he was trying his damnedest to work out a way at the last minute of preventing Paul Mashatile from becoming deputy president of the country. And now that Paul Mashatile is deputy president of the country, this actually sets up a scenario where, given that Cyril effectively bought his way to the presidency, remember, he doesn't have a constituency. He doesn't have a voting base. Cyril is there because he was able to take money and he was able to buy votes. But now that those votes have been bought, is he ripe for recall? I think the answer to that is yes. And I strongly suspect that right now the long knives are being sharpened, and this is going to set us up for the ability of the ANC to now recall Cyril Ramaphosa. And I think that that's a good thing, because frankly, if I had to choose between Mashatile and Ramaphosa, I would choose Mashatile. Look, make no bones about it. I'm not saying that Mashatile is going to be a less corrupt representative of the ANC than Cyril Ramaphosa is. What I'm saying is that at least during the time that Mashatile served as MEC for finance in Gauteng, which was when Mbazima Shilowa was premier, this province actually worked reasonably well. That was the time at which we got the cow train in place. That was the time at which we had that massive rollout of solar geysers to the east bank of Alex, which if you drive along the N3, you can see to this day. Yeah, so, I don't care if Mashatile runs the Alex Mafia. That's fine. I would rather have the Alex Mafia in place running the country, but actually doing a basic level of service delivery. So now let's talk about Sputla. Okay.
Hold on a second. I just want to point out before you move on to Sputla, if that's true,
yes,
this is even more damning of Cyril, that he at the last minute still was not able to come together, bring a plan. Like, he's just politically incompetent, if nothing else. I mean, how could he not foresee that there would be some kind of a challenge to him? And if he did foresee it, sitting on his hands for 2 weeks while Didi Mabuza manipulates him. Didi Mabuza, who's no rocket scientist himself. And Paul Mashatile has outmaneuvered him too. This shows you how absolutely effete and, as Ivo said, feckless our president is. Now, on to Sputla.
Well, now, from my perspective, okay, Sputla is Mashatile's man. Any disagreements from anyone around here? I'm very clear that Sputla is very much part of Team Mashatile, and again, I think that this is something that Cyril basically didn't want to have to deal with. But given the way in which the votes actually stacked up, this is something that Cyril was forced to deal with, and Sputla ends up being the person that gets drafted there. But remember, at the same time, the fact that you now have this creation of a position effectively within the presidency, this doesn't mean that he has the ability to override Gwede or Praveen, because the ministry in the presidency does not control the departments that actually, firstly, control the electricity supply and distribution, or the procurement of energy generally, but also doesn't really have a budget to be able to implement any sort of rollout, unless there's suddenly a situation where massive amounts of money are pushed into the presidency in order for him to actually try and roll out all of these solar plants so that the larger Ramaphosa family, and here we're talking about Jeff Radebe and Patrice Motsepe and all of them who are in the
our first family.
Our first family. Thank you. Yes, that's the phrase I was looking for. But so that they can do their rollout of as independent power producers.
The Rockefellers and Vanderbilts of South Africa.
Yeah.
Listen.
But guys, right now, what I'm trying to say is that look behind the lines. Okay, the ANC is currently tearing itself apart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's and the big battles in the ANC have yet to come. We're going to see over the next year a desperate scramble to try and find some way to buy votes. So, so one of the disastrous things that's coming along next year have been the changes to the pension fund laws. I don't know how many of you have been following this. Ivo, you probably have some indication of this. But effectively what they're going to do is to change the pension fund laws so that you're able to draw out money from your pension before retirement time. Which is, so it's on the one hand, it's going to keep the masses, particularly in terms of public service workers, very happy because they're suddenly going to be able to dip into their pension funds and spend all this money on God knows what. But it's a disaster for the country because in the long term, it means that those are going to be people without pensions, and the country is going to have to find some way to support them. But this is going to come into effect in the next tax year with the elections, and it's very clear to me it's a vote-buying scheme. So you're going to see a lot of scrambles along these lines, a lot of last-minute feeding at the trough in order to effectively buy votes next year. But an ANC that's tearing itself apart, guys, is a good thing. I think it's a good thing.
All right. Phumi?
Remember that I said to you guys after Nasrec, that Paul Mashatile is the biggest winner. And that what we're swiftly heading towards is a Paul Mashatile president of the ANC. And you can also see that Paul is playing a long game. And you see it in the way that the local municipality games are playing out. Why is the EFF pulling out its very strategic and for a long time, particularly in KZN, working coalition with the IFP because they're positioning themselves, so Julius Malema is positioning himself for a presidency of Paul Mashatile and himself as deputy president, hopefully in a coalition. And because they're all reading the signs, right? They're all looking at the polls that we're all looking at, the polls that are saying in the next general election, the ANC is going to dip below 50%. They're going to need a coalition partner. In looking at the way the EFF is playing out in the coalitions in Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni, and making a very concerted effort of becoming friendly with the ANC in Gauteng, speaking of Paul Mashatile's men, which is also the current premier of, Gauteng, ANC Panyaza Lusufi, also a Paul Mashatile comrade, Paul Mashatile peer, and Sputla, definitely a Paul Mashatile peer, and all of these individuals and all of the way that they are positioning themselves, the long game is 2024 and what they hope to pull out in 2024. And I think one of the things that we're also, for me, the cabinet reshuffle is neither here nor there. They've got 12 months, maybe 15 months at most before there is.
You say the cabinet reshuffle is neither here nor there, but we've got a poll up, and I think people want to vote in this. My favorite new minister is A, Sputla of electricity, B, NDZ for ladies, kids, and cripples, C, I'm all for more ministers. Those are for the people, obviously we've created that category, especially for those people who think our cabinet is too small. And then finally, I'm not impressed at all for the cynics. So you can go and vote in our poll. Tell us who your favorite new minister is or what your opinion is, and go and vote now. We want to know your thoughts. We will announce the results at the end of the show. So, Ivo, can I quickly come to you because you've specifically highlighted something which I think we talk very little about in this country. We actually have another chamber of parliament. There is a whole other chamber that we pay for. And it's been confusing for a lot of us, especially those of us who once studied constitutional law. This is effectively meant to be like our Senate, but they don't really have any power. It's a house to put traditional leaders in so that they feel listened to. You know, there's a lot of lip service that gets paid here. It's a national council of provinces where supposedly the provincial legislature is represented by these people in some sort of national structure. How exactly it works befuddles and confuses even people who are in the National Council of Provinces. What do they do? How do they do it? Why is it dominated by the ANC? And why might the ANC still control it, even if they lose their majority in the National Assembly?
Well, they do as little as possible, which is, I think, what you could say for any sort of government structure or government body. Most of us notice it when, when there's a SONA, the State of the Nation address, and it's a joint sitting of Parliament, and the, commentators, helpfully tell us that this is a joint sitting between the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, and we get to welcome the Speaker of Speaker of Parliament, and we welcome the Chair of the National Council of Provinces, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, that exists. That exists." Doesn't really seem to do anything, but it exists. What it does is, on any legislation that affects the provinces, it has to consider the legislation. It can recommend, in fact, it can demand changes to the legislation. It can then either accept the legislation or it can throw the legislation back to the National Assembly. So it can block legislation that is passed by the National Assembly. If the National Assembly wishes to override such a block, they have to do so by a 2/3 majority, which is an extremely high hurdle. So, now you think, okay, well, what affects the provinces? That's actually a fairly long list. They can't, for example, affect the presidency. The president is elected by the National Assembly, and that's purely a National Assembly matter. They can't affect the budget, the national budget, because again, that's a Parliament matter and not a provincial matter. But they can affect anything that involves education, primary and secondary education, agriculture, consumer protection, disaster management, environmental matters, health services, housing, indigenous and customary law, industrial promotion, police to a limited extent, population development, public transport, tourism, trade, urban and rural development, and welfare services. And this is only half of the list of subjects on which the National Council of Provinces is empowered to veto or amend legislation.
Right.
So they actually have an enormous amount of power. They've been acting as a rubber stamp, obviously. If the cabinet is ANC controlled and the Parliament is ANC dominated, and the NCOP is ANC dominated, they're all just going to say, yes, boss, this is what we're going to do. What happens when the ANC loses its majority in Parliament, and let's assume that it does not get to lead a governing coalition, which I actually think is unlikely come 2024. But let's say a DA-led coalition takes over Parliament. The NCOP is constructed out of 90 members, 10 of which come from each province. So every province has an equal delegation going to the National Council of Provinces. That delegation is comprised proportionally, depending on the party representation in the provincial legislatures. Now, at the moment, the ANC controls an outright majority of 7 provinces. Right? Right. It has a 5-member delegation in the Gauteng delegation. So 5 out of 10 of Gauteng's votes are ANC, and the only one where it has a minority is in the Western Cape, where it has only 3 members in the provincial delegation. Now, most of the votes in the NCOP happen per province, not per individual member. Right. So the fact that the ANC dominates 7 provinces and has an equal share in Gauteng gives it probably, well, a minimum of 78% of the vote in the NCOP. It is much more dominant there than it is in Parliament. Now, there's some polling that the IRR has done, the Institute for Race Relations, and frankly, I don't think any of the polling that's being done in South Africa is very reliable for a number of reasons. And it's not that the pollsters are particularly bad; it's just the nature of polling and what people are going to say when you ask them certain questions. But it does suggest that there's a possibility that a number of the provinces could switch come 2024. Just right. Like it says that the country would probably switch. The ANC would go to 42% or something. Now that actually really needs to happen because it's a big move. It's a big change to get the ANC from about 65% of the members and 78% of the votes in the NCOP to below 50%.
Right.
If they don't do that, then the ANC is going to play spoiler. On anything that affects the provinces, the ANC is going to be able to veto Parliament, and then force Parliament to adopt things with a 2/3 majority, which of course any new government coalition will never achieve. So it's a massive thing, and I've been surprised that political analysts and so on haven't really been talking much about it. I think the only one I saw in the last year that spoke about it was an article by Pierre de Vos.
So can I just, am I unmuted here? One of the things that we often talk about also with you, Kanthan, here on the show is the business of politicking, which almost all our MPs are terrible at. And what you alluded to, Ivo, is the fact that going into the next 5-year term after the 2024 election is going to need astute politicians. I watch a lot of the by-election numbers as well. Personally, I think the EFF have made a miscalculation by pulling out of their coalition agreement with the IFP, because there's a lot of by-elections that we're seeing in the KZN area, and almost all of them have the IFP trending up. So the likelihood that even in the 2024 election, the IFP's numbers are going to swing back quite drastically away from the ANC is also about, and you're talking about the switching just in that National Council of Provinces, the business of politicking, the business of walking the floor and getting and whipping the votes, which is what Pemba Jodina should be doing for the ANC, which I don't believe that the DA is particularly good at, right? In kind of canvassing people across the floor from them to come onto their side when it comes to passing through legislation and pushing bills through. They're not particularly good at that. And that's also one of the reasons why when we look at the coalition structures in the municipalities, of the 8 metros where there were coalitions, there are only 3 DA members left. There was one in Tshwane, there was one in Johannesburg, there was one in Cape Town, one in Nelson Mandela Bay, one in Ekurhuleni. There are only 3 left. There are only 3 left standing, right? Because they're not particularly good at whipping votes, at talking to their colleagues and moving them across the floor to their side for the greater good of everybody. And this is one of the reasons why I think a coalition government in South Africa is going to struggle terribly. And it is also the reason why, I'm sorry, Musi Maimane, the idea of changing the game and having individuals stand for the position of president will never work, because the most important thing is being able to get the people around the table to the same place. And none of our guys are good at doing that.
Agreed.
I think there's a lot of discussion about that, though, about how the coalitions might work, and I agree with you. I think it's going to be absolute chaos. I think it's going to be a very traumatic time, even under the best of scenarios. I think the best scenario is a DA-led coalition, despite all its flaws. But I think the national coalition government will be terrible. I think a lot of the small parties will have the power to basically bring down the president at any time they choose. Which there's going to be no stability in government for a long time to come if that happens. But I think that's separate
But
from
Ivo,
that's the one issue that's being discussed, and what's
look
not discussed
look
is
at
the
the plus
NCOP.
side.
Mm-hmm.
Kanthan is our silver lining man this morning.
Yeah, on the plus side, Ivo, if it's going to be total chaos, they're not going to be able to pass a budget and steal money.
I agree.
And that's fantastic.
I agree. I'm an old school libertarian, and I believe not in an efficient government. I believe in an inefficient government. The less government is able to do, the less they are able to infringe on our rights to do things for ourselves.
Wow. Okay. Well, we seem to be coming full circle on this stuff, because I can remember a conversation with the four of us, actually, not so long ago, on whether or not electricity was going to be the final tripwire. But ironically, the wire has been stolen by cable thieves. Guys, let's move on to some international stuff, because there's quite a lot to talk about in the international sphere. I don't know if you've seen, but there's been quite a lot of noise about January the 6th, which we were told in America was the insurrection. There were congressional hearings held, there were investigations done. Some people are languishing in prison as we speak because they were unable to make a difference, to do their thing, to actually effect change the way that they wanted to. Now, suddenly, there's a whole lot of footage turning up, which Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the House, has given to Fox News, which is making it patently evident to anyone who has eyes that this is less insurrection and more kind of guided tour / bunch of droogs who walked into a government building and got very little done other than, I don't know, stealing Nancy Pelosi's lectern. This was never going to overturn democracy. Why was it so hyperinflated by the Democrats at the time?
Do you want me to have a go at that?
You can.
All right.
I mean,
go for it.
All right,
I threw a line into the water and no one's biting.
I've spoken on this many times, so I'd rather hear Ivo on it. Yeah.
I do consider it an insurrection, and I think minimizing it is a mistake. There was a significant amount of violence, and some and the whole thing was unauthorized. You don't waltz into Congress and physically try to block Congress from effectively rubber stamping the results of an election. That is insurrection. The footage that Tucker Carlson got, it is interesting in the sense that this gives this QAnon shaman dude some very interesting footage to show in court to argue that he may not have been aware that what he was doing was trespassing and so on. But the reality is that those police officers that escorted him in and led him all the way to the Congress, to the doors of the Congress chambers, they were all fired for misconduct. Right, so they weren't right in what they were doing. They were wrong, and they were disciplined over it. Frankly, I think that there should be similar criminal charges levied against them for allowing people unauthorized access to Congress and allowing people to go threaten Congress critters. So I'm not sure that what Tucker Carlson has is quite as powerful as he makes it out to be. It is useful to the QAnon shaman in his court case, certainly. I think it will certainly lead to mitigation of sentence in his case. But I don't think it fundamentally changes what that day was all about, and that it was not sightseeing. This was not just people wandering around Congress, just as if they were allowed to be there. They weren't. They were there to be disruptive. Some of them were violent. It really was an attack on the seat of U.S. government. The whole notion that you can just stop a Congress from certifying an election, I think that in itself is a seditious notion.
All right. That's very different opinion to Kanthan's from just a couple of days ago when we spoke about this stuff. So, all right, you want to say...
No. Look, certainly in terms of the... remember the key issue in terms of June 6th. By the way, I agree with the broad brushstrokes of what Ivo was just talking about. Because, should anyone be allowed to charge the Houses of Parliament, it's kind of like the EFF trying to charge the stage when Ramaphosa is delivering his sona. It's certainly not a peaceful protest, and it's I think that kind of stuff has no place in a democracy any more than But you see, the question of June 6th is not whether the stuff that they did was peaceful protest or not. The heart of it is whether it was instigated by Donald J. Trump. That is the heart of it. And ultimately, this is not about trying to go after the people who actually caused the cuck on June 6th, because they did cause cuck on June 6th. This is about trying to find a backdoor way of preventing Donald Trump from running in the next election. Simply. And, every time we start focusing on what actually happened behind the scenes, the question really is, was this something that was directed by Donald Trump, or was it not? You see, in other words, was there culpability on the part of Donald Trump? And that, for me, is the key issue. I don't believe there was culpability on the part of Trump in this. In fact, all of the sound bites that we've seen, the tweets that we saw from Trump said, peaceful stuff only. No violence and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I think we're getting too caught up right now.
I think that's a bit. I think that's a bit naive and a bit disingenuous. Of course, even Trump isn't stupid enough to call for violence on Twitter. But when he said, and I don't have the quotes in front of me, but the way he told people to come to the Capitol and to fight this, that implicitly is an invitation for unspecified trouble. He might have plausible deniability in a court of law, but I think his intent was pretty clear.
Well, wait. Ivo, are you suggesting that we should bypass rule of law and that we should, in fact, prosecute based on interpretation of intent?
We'll let a court decide whether it actually constitutes incitement to violence, whether it actually constitutes incitement to insurrection, or not court, but a Congress, because the president, and I think a former president, can only be tried in Congress, isn't it true?
A former president can only be tried in Congress. I don't believe that is in fact the case, because you can't be charged.
No, a sitting president can only be tried. A sitting president
can be tried by Congress. Yes.
Okay, so he'll end up facing the Supreme Court, no doubt.
Yeah, but a former
Joe
president.
Joe Biden is the sitting president. He's sitting because he can't stand up for too long, and I don't think he has to try for. He doesn't have to be tried, but the only thing he has to try for is to pee without it burning.
Look, guys, the interesting thing that's going on right now, if you look at the discussion that took place between Ted Cruz and Merrick Garland over the past days.
That was interesting.
And it was very interesting, because Cruz was basically saying to Merrick Garland, the reason why you went after the question of the documents at Mar-a-Lago was you were trying to build a case. And it was a political case, and that's the reason why information was leaked from within your department in terms of what was going to be happening. But no such leaks happened in the case of Joe Biden. And is there in fact a politically motivated series of leaks? And Garland's plausible deniability response again, Ivo, is I condemn all leaks and I'm not responsible for them, and that's okay. Because plausible deniability is the cornerstone of politics.
I mean, I sometimes wish that people paid attention, like Phumi does, to our judicial appointments, because, when the JSC comes together, you've got all these people from the various parties, and they all talk to judges. And I remember there was a fair amount of interest last year when we were choosing our Chief Justice. And I wish that we paid as much attention as America do. They obviously broadcast on C-SPAN the the judicial appointments that Congress has to make to judges all over the country for circuit courts and appeal courts and so on. And there have been some amazing exchanges between people who are standing for positions in the judiciary and them being grilled by the members of Congress. It makes me think that even though America's system is full of massive holes and there are big problems there, that there are certain things that are still happening. Like you see these people being questioned. You see them having to stand and give answers for things that they've said and done before. And I love seeing that accountability, even if it is just for show, because we don't know, sometimes the party just votes someone in anyway. But it's nice to see that stuff. And I kind of miss it here.
Well, this comes back to the question right now in terms of who actually controls the Senate. And it's a very different scenario going back to as recently as the Obama era, where there actually was behind-the-scenes discussion that would take place across both sides of the political divide. There would be negotiations, and effectively it was, up until that stage, a reasonably functional system in terms of how these appointments were effected. So the first time it went toes up was at the point at which Obama was not allowed to put forward a nominee for the Supreme Court. In fact, it was the very same Merrick Garland. And in hindsight, seeing the way Garland has conducted himself over the past period, the guy is a turd royale. But having said that, it was fundamentally wrong for a Republican-controlled Senate to not allow a nominee to be put forward for the position of Supreme Court Justice. That was the point, to my mind, at which the U.S. system actually fell apart. It's now a pale shadow of its former self. I think that the ability to have those discussions that actually allow for compromise on bills before they get put forward result in the divisive politics that you've got right now.
I tend to agree.
The Roe versus Wade thing is a good example, to kind of crystallize this. You had a situation where you had Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and they could have codified Roe versus Wade before it actually ended up being, summarily ejected by the Supreme Court. Why did they not do it? Well, it's because they were very clear that this was a wedge issue in terms of the coming elections. And it was better to have it there as a divisive wedge rather than actually trying to keep the country working. So, Gareth, I think that, yes, it's kind of like our Constitution. It's great, but it was designed with Mandela in mind. And, you should design things with your worst enemy actually implementing the laws. Ivo,
I just want to say, Kanthan, one of the things that you allude to is interesting because we were talking about that with the NCOP, is the fact that what they are also able to do effectively in the states is they're able to whip the votes. They're able to go and talk to each individual and get them on side or not for whatever they're trying to push through on both sides, right? And
no, Phumi, I'm saying that's no longer the case.
That's so. You and I are in agreement that one of the things that has happened, similar to we said, is the blocks of voting, and people are now, and interestingly, I wanted to bring this up. What we saw happening on Monday in the council, or rather in Action SA in Tshwane, with them wanting to put their councillors to lie detectors so that they can figure out who did not block vote with them, for the mayor. And those are the things that break the way the system is supposed to work. And down the line, it's got consequences down the line as well. Ivo, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kanthan. I don't think the US system is working as well as intended. One of the things that bothers me, for example, was the questioning of judges. Is they don't ask judges about their judicial philosophy or their position on the Constitution or things that to me would seem relevant. It's all about hot button political issues. Where do you stand on transsexuals? Where do you stand on dinosaurs living at the same time as people? Should we teach our children evolution, or is that going to turn them into Satanists? It's all of these crappy, bloody partisan, batshit issues that they get tested on. And abortion. It shouldn't matter what a judge's opinion about abortion is. What should matter is how well their decision would be grounded in law, and that goes back to their history, in terms of how they've applied the law in the past, and their philosophy of how they would apply the law. Do they believe in states' rights, etc.
It's been
I just don't think it's serious anymore.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for a lot in politics. There's so much that's performative now. So, Ivo, couple of things, because we haven't had you on for a while. People thought that we'd had some kind of disagreement with you and that we hadn't invited you, but I promise there was no such thing. But you're here now, and one of the other things you want to address is the move against objectivity in journalism. Now, this is particular to your area of interest, but I think a lot of us will be pulled into this because we're sick to death of seeing media publications being used for political narratives and agendas, and we're not sure who to believe anymore. And it's an ongoing discussion since the world of fake news opened up so long ago. Let's hear your thoughts on this, and let's hear why we should all be worried about it.
Well, there was a Washington Post article written by a guy called Leonard Downey, and he's a former executive editor of the Post and a professor at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. So he is himself a fairly senior figure. But it wasn't just an opinion article. He actually went out and interviewed 75 or so people in the media, at all levels of the media, to discover the values and practices in mainstream newsrooms today. And he said that what we found has convinced us that truth-seeking news media must move beyond whatever objectivity once meant to produce what he calls more trustworthy views, and talks about a generational shift in American journalism. And basically, they argue that young journalists think that they got it all wrong, that objectivity is really a way of dressing up the stale status quo opinions of an establishment, that establishment being, probably majority older, white, male, etc. And that it ignores a lot of alternative viewpoints and alternative lived experiences. Now, of course, the whole thing comes out of the woke movement, the critical theory movement, that elevates subjective experiences, lived experiences, above, annoying things like objective facts. And this is, I'm sure you've had a lot to say about critical theory in the past. And to me, this is a real problem, though. I mean, I agree that a lot of viewpoints have been excluded in the media and don't get enough coverage. And I absolutely welcome reading more about those views and reading more from those writers. I think it's important that we do get a very wide variety of views. But to say that you want to throw out objectivity, I think throws the baby out with the bathwater. Now, look, I'm an opinion writer, right? So maybe it's a bit ironic for me to be all up in arms about this. Because I write my subjective opinion on things. But my subjective opinion must be grounded in fact. I rely heavily on news reporters that give me both sides of the story, that give me what I believe to be an objective take on what actually happened. I wasn't always there. I wasn't there to interview the people. I expect news reporters to give me an objective report on that, so I know what's going on. When I take a position, I want to know that I've heard all sides of the story, and that when I dismiss an opinion, I've done so only once I've understood the opinion that I dismiss, and I've understood the people whose opinion I dismiss.
It sounds like a lot of work to me, for many journalists these days, though. That sounds like far too much work.
I think for a lot journalist, it probably is too much work. But I'm a bit old school that way, I suppose. I like to be able to point to research, and this research consists of scientific papers and so on, but it also consists of actual news reporting.
What do we think of this? I mean, Phumi, Kanthan, what do you say to what Ivo's just brought up here from that article?
Look, my personal track record. Remember, I went back to ENCA with a view to getting the audience figures back up to above 50% of market share, because they had fallen to below 30% of market share. And I was given a year to do it, and I did it in 3 months. And how did I do it? It's very simple. You push relentlessly the concept of accuracy, objectivity, and fairness, and you strip out the adjectives. And it really is as simple as that, because people will actually be able to tell when you are trying to get them to swallow a particular line.
But it also got you fired.
Well, it also got me a year's paid holiday. So, guys, let's not forget that.
But
in the middle of COVID.
I thought it was interesting that the author of the article, Downey, he at one point in that article, he said he never understood quite what objectivity meant. And he didn't consider it a standard for the newsroom. He said, my goals for our journalism were instead accuracy, fairness, non-partisanship, accountability, and the pursuit of truth. Well, fine. If you don't know what objectivity means, then I can go with those, those criteria: accuracy, fairness, partisanship, etc. So the power just went off here, so my UPS complained.
Okay, so it was your UPS. I wondered what the beeping was. You get to have something to say.
The minute you make it cut,
I can live with that. But the thing is, what he's describing there is objectivity, or at least striving for objectivity. I mean,
Phumi, go ahead.
The minute you make a cut, the minute you make a decision that this is what we put on, because news or reporting is not a data dump. You have to have a point of view, and that point of view is informed by all sorts of things, right? So the minute you make a cut, the minute you decide this part of what this person is saying instead of that part, or the whole of what this person is saying, that makes it. And is it less accurate? The fact that you've left out half the sentence, is it less accurate? It's making a decision. I don't know if that decision.
But I agree with you.
I agree.
That speaks to fairness, and I just want to say, and the question of fairness for me is at the point at which you choose to omit particular facts in order to skew the story, makes it patently unfair, and that's really an objective test. If you are leaving it out because it's irrelevant, that's one thing. If you're leaving it out because you're trying to push an agenda, it's different. And when I teach journalists this stuff to this day, my line is very simple: accuracy, get the facts right; objectivity, don't take sides; fairness, don't bring stuff into the conversation that's meant to skew the story in a particular direction. The stuff is not rocket science.
No.
And it actually works. But just one last thing, guys.
I accept that. Sorry, I accept that no individual journalists can be expected to reach pure objectivity. It doesn't exist. But if one journalist leaves out a certain section, that actually twists the meaning of what happened, or twists the truth, then another journalist won't. And if I then read 3 or 4 reports, I'll get a good picture.
Honourable members, on a point of order, I know you've got more to get off your chest. Kanthan, last word, and then I've got to give the poll results, because we've got to know who...
My last word is I want to send a shout-out to Helen Ziller. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Helen. Oh. I want to send a shout-out to Duncan McLeod.
It's also his birthday.
Yes. Tech Central, it's also his birthday. Happy birthday.
I believe he's turning 50 today.
He is turning 50 today, indeed. Yeah. So
can't believe you wasted our time with other people's birthdays.
With balloons on the timeline.
All right.
What's the poll results?
Here are the results, ladies and gentlemen. You've been waiting all morning. The final poll is: our favorite new minister of Cyril's cabinet is A, the Minister of Electricity, Sputla. Only 9% of the vote went to Sputla. 4%, right at the bottom of the pile, to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma for ladies, kids, and cripples. I'm in for more ministers than that. People who wanted an even bigger cabinet, 6%. And that means 81%, I'm afraid, not impressed at all with Cyril's new cabinet. Oh, no. Poor Cyril. Back to the drawing board. Thanks, everybody. That is the Burning Platform for today. We will see you next week. Same time, same place. Thank you, Ivo. Thank you, Kanthan. Thank you, Phumi. And most especially, thank you to you. Cheers, everybody. Have a very good Thursday. Bye-bye.